Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for one of Detroit's finest, brilliant persons, Mr. Sam Riddle, ladies and gentlemen.
The woman was right. Growing old is a bitch. Excuse me. I'll be 67 this year, and you know, my pacemaker defibrillator's never gone off, and last year about this time I ran 18.6 miles in federal prison at Butner, North Carolina. So Gina, when they ask me, have you ever been in trouble with the law? Yeah. Have you ever been to prison? Yeah. But, you know, as a graduate of Michigan State University and the University of Michigan Law School, I'll tell you something. There are more graduates of the University of Prisons in Detroit, Michigan, than Michigan State and Michigan combined. And, you know, there's something a little wrong with that. But coming up on a stage like this, I feel particularly good about it because, you know, when you're in a room with talent and people that have been around the block a bit, you have a comfort zone. And actually, there's been some pretty big blocks some of us have been around. And, you know, I got a call when I had been released from federal prison from a young minister in Detroit. And he asked me if I would work with him and his organization. I said, well, yeah, okay, because the founder of that organization and I had worked together in years past, crisscrossing the nation. And I started working with him, and we were having meetings at a church where Malcolm X gave his first message to the grassroots, a ballot or bullet speech here in Detroit, the historic King Solomon Baptist Church, a couple of blocks south of the boulevard on 14th. And we were having meetings in this chapel of the church. It's a gigantic old church that's battered like the city of Detroit, but you know if it's treated properly that it can make a comeback. And there were only like about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people at the meetings initially. And you know, he talked to me about, well, how do you deal with that, Sam? I mean, you've organized all over the country. Matter of fact, in Colorado, I represent the family of Isaiah Shows and still do, the only black student killed at Columbine. But when you look at something like that, you have to reflect on your own history. And some of you in the room were with me there. I'm not going to date or age you, but you know who you are. When we were in undergrad at Michigan State University, I went to Michigan State during the late 60s, early 70s. And if you can remember, as they say, the 60s, you weren't there. And I say that because I had a couple of blurry decades before Monica. But I just want to say this, though, and that is that I related to him something that happened during undergrad when we organized under a group called the Black Liberation Front at Michigan State University. And that is that at our meetings we were having, we only had like a handful of people, you know, and we were so relevant. I mean, we had big fros, we had blue jean jackets and pants that matched, and we were spouting plenty of trash. We were anti-racist, anti-everything, anti-white, but still we were students at Michigan State University. But we were anti-everything to the point where we had simply isolated ourselves. There was a reason we only had a handful of people in the room. And there's a reason that this room is filled. And that's because this is one of the most progressive presentations outside of Ann Arbor or East Lansing that takes place in the state of Michigan, or in the nation for that matter. I mean, where else do you get a transgendered human being, first of all, followed up by an ex-convict that's being mentioned seriously in mainstream media just because he picked up some damn petitions. But I told this minister, I said, you know, if you're going to build an organization, you can't make the same mistakes we did in East Lansing initially. You know, we were into this super black mode. If your hair was too straight or you were too light skinned, you know, we had this litmus test. Are you black enough? You know, is your hair kinky enough? Are you raggedy enough? Did you come out of a working class family? Oh, your family was a doctor or a lawyer? You couldn't possibly work with us. But there was a level of internal bias and prejudice that resulted in us only garnering 8 to 10 people in the meeting room. And we looked around and we talked to each other and we were always right. We were never wrong. But we only had 8 to 10 people in the room. We dogged out the alphas. We dogged out the Qs. We dogged out the kappas, deltas, zetas, AKAs. I told them I've been to Greece. I hadn't seen any black Greeks. They didn't think that was very funny. But what we were doing, we were anti-gay, let alone if somebody had been talking transgender. That just wasn't going to work. Because we were all machos, you know, tough guys. But let me tell you something. We went through what we call a critical phase where we engaged in self-criticism, where we examined our mode of behavior. And we realized, and it was pretty tough sledding, that we had isolated ourselves. We had set up big walls between us and other human beings. And instead of ostracizing, once we reached that stage, instead of ostracizing people who had chosen to be members of black fraternities and black sororities, we started going to their events, watching how organized they were with their pledges. They had discipline. When they said do something, folks did it. And they had, you know, way more people in their meetings. Plus, they seem to be having real fun. So when we began to open up, and at this time, I want you to understand, I'd served 4 years in the United States military. I quit high school and going in the military, got a GED, was accepted into Michigan State. Matter of fact, the anti-war movement was really garnering steam at that point. But we, for some stupid reason, thought that the anti-war movement and the environmental movement was a white thing. Further, isolation, negating the reality that the cannon fodder for Vietnam was coming from urban America, from those individuals that scored lowest on the test because of the institutional racism rampant in the educational system throughout America. The lower you score on a test, that means you're going to be carrying a gun and crawling around. And that's not a good situation. But we opened up bit by bit. And this is what I'm relating to this young minister. And I know he's like, dang, this old guy's just this war story, man. Why is he telling me all this? But I had to tell him the story of Michigan State University, because as soon as we opened up and we started mingling and reaching out to individuals who came from different backgrounds, some of whom's parents had been lawyers and doctors, teachers, and some of whom were fair-skinned. When we quit questioning who was blacker than now, when we started opening up the organization, we even, at that time, like I said, we were so anti-everything that we had totally isolated ourselves. And I'm telling the young minister this for a reason, because I'm looking over there on 14th Street and I'm seeing our early organizational phases at Michigan State repeating themselves 40-something years later or more. And I told him how once we started opening up and going and meeting with people of different cultures, different sexual preferences, different races, suddenly our meetings were large. They got larger and larger. We started speaking at the anti-war movements once we discerned the real facts about who was really dying, being drafted out of proportion, dying out of proportion, because it was real clear that the poor and the working classes were the ones that were dying in Vietnam, while some people like George W. and others never even came close to a real battlefield. But when we opened up, and again, I'm telling you, you got to see this situation. I'm sitting here in this raggedy church on 14th Street, but it's rich in spirit. And I'm telling him not to make the same mistakes that we made organizationally. And suddenly, you were just mentioning the EFM, we started opening up our meetings. We invited folks who were being whacked by the right to work legislation taking place here. We started inviting folks in who may have been gay, may have been transgender, may have had different professional experiences. We started seeing a movement grow here in Detroit recently as we negated the same mistakes we made in East Lansing. I say that to point out to you that, as Mahatma Gandhi told us, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you. There were only 35 people at the demonstration. Then they fight you, arrest them, take a rider to jail. And when after they fight you, they ignore you, they ridicule you, they fight you, then you win. And you're winning with the Detroit Good News story with what's occurring here tonight. That young minister is winning even though he's garnering haters now, because suddenly they're writing stories about him, putting him on TV and whatnot. Then I have to warn him about another phenomenon we learned. I talked to him about media intoxication. And there's no real 12-step program for that, but there ought to be. Because what occurs is you get to believing that you are more important than you are, and you shed your cloak of humility. As long as you are humble, it's like wearing a Kevlar vest. You're untouchable. Humility is everything. I understand this. Here I am, fresh out of federal prison. I've learned one thing: never travel to China with a congressman's wife. I won't do it. I won't do that again. But anyway, the point that I'm making is this, and that is, as I related the reality of what some of us have lived through, I thought how fortunate I am to be alive right now and able to relate real life experiences to this young minister before the easy P and the easy money get a hold of him. Because see, once you start getting that media attention, you might as well be bouncing a basketball aside LeBron, or catching a football, or acting in film and whatnot. Because with that media attention comes groupies. And what I find is that I'm actually engaging in father-like activities with these young leaders that are growing up in Detroit right now. And one of the things that's most disheartening when we do that is watching some of the older leaderships put their foot in the throats of the young men and women and restrict their activities instead of encouraging them and mentoring them. But drawing on the lessons of Michigan State University, we, I believe, are laying the foundation to challenge business as usual here in Detroit. You know, in Alabama, I told the minister, less than 500 people refused to turn around on the Edmund Pettus Bridge when John Lewis, who's now a congressman, got his head beat. And one of the things that I know that Homeland Security is acutely aware of is that we have another bridge, our own, right here in Michigan. And all I can tell you is this story ends abruptly. Stay tuned. Thank you.
a good message.